Making noise to see if the fucking shit is working properly, because I still don't have fucking... I need to get that set. One of the things that I need to do for these streams is I need to get, like, OBS set up properly to where it's like all my scenes are organized. It's not just like scene, fucking 69 420, like 2 fucking, because I duplicate a scene because it was good enough for that part but not for something else. Like, I need to properly label my shit. I need to get like professional and shit. But
Yeah, man.
yeah, anyway,
Wear a
so
suit.
yeah,
Talk about
yeah,
Austrian economics, and
so
then get Coke money,
one moment.
and get a.
Cool.
Well, no, we
All
have to talk about Chicago economics. We want Coke money. They want the very watered down version of libertarianism. Remember?
You'd be
We
surprised.
need a local central bank.
You'd be surprised because if you have donors trust like in your funding tree for things like if you go on Crunchbase or SourceWatch or Wikispooks or whatever, and you start to like really highlight who donors trust supported, and who those people are connected to, it gets dicey because like donors trust is the primary faucet for Coke funds, and they support so many libertarian organizations. And even if they don't directly donate to the Libertarian Party and just like Libertarian Party candidates occasionally, which they definitely do.
The Coke was tentacles are in everything attached to libertarianism.
Yeah, well, and even if they don't do that, they fund Heritage Foundation. They fund Americans for Prosperity. They fund Young Americans for Liberty and Students for Liberty. They fund all of these organizations that form the ideological backbone of it. Reason Magazine, Foundation for Economic Education. All of these things that form the backbone for, like, boilerplate, milquetoast, libertarian bullshit, right-wing cocksucking. So it's like, for me, for my money, even if they don't, they are... Anyway, welcome to Jeremiah Talks again for another conversation. We're off to a banging... we're going to, I guess, loosely discuss that. But mostly we're going to be talking about the Paleo strategy today. And how that has bollocksed up a bunch of shit for the libertarian space. And also, with regard to that, the general vibe here... we're going to be doing 2 episodes on this subject, maybe more, but probably just 2. And right now, we're going to be doing these guests, and then next week, there's going to be the Libertarian Convention. And so there's going to be, people here who can't be here then, they'll be there, not here. So when we do next week, we'll be doing it with people who weren't here this week, maybe some who are still interested in being there for Pardieu, and who aren't there to get sweaty with a bunch of dudes, because let's face it, that's the primary group of people you're going to be talking to at the Libertarian Convention. But the general vibe that I want to convey is this is going to be a discussion on some older shit that affects some newer shit and is shit for everyone. So, with that being said, let us introduce guests. We'll start with Keith, who it's been a while, so maybe there's some new subscribers who aren't familiar. And then we'll go to Lizard, fucking Kareem, Hody, Rose. Then I'll start saying words out of my fuckhole. Go ahead, Keith.
I'm Keith Preston. If you want to know more about me, go to attackthesystem.com. You can find copies of my books and essays and more from interviews I've done elsewhere.
Cool. And you're a panarchist.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Just it's like, I'm Jeremiah. I'm an alcoholic. Kareem.
Drinking too much.
Kareem.
All right, I am Kareem from Anarch Unity. You can find me on Twitter at 6633. I'm also going to be a delegate for the PA State Convention. So if you're at the Libertarian Convention, come and see me. My goal with the LPMC is to actually make it and keep it consistent with the principles that we talked about, keeping the legacy of Murray Rothbard going, which we're going to talk about today. I think we need to keep early Rothbard strategies going because that was when he was at the prime of his thought, in my opinion. And honestly, when he talked to Bookchin, I think a lot of good stuff could have come out of that. Rose will also be there. And in addition to doing this, I also have my own show, The Essential Libertarians. And I co-host, or I go on Outlawed Thoughts with Leighton Radner. Good dude. And I'm also going to say in the recent drama, just on live for the record, Leighton is a good dude. I do not approve of anyone calling him a right-wing fascist guy, and that's pretty much it. My goal here with this stuff, like, because we talked about this, and then I'll drop the subject, is they're making comedy. We can make a better show, and not only that, we can make a show that actually reaches more people if we stay principled. So that's my main thing, is let's not worry about the Twitter personalities. Some of them are, like, I don't think, after looking at them, they're actively coming after anyone. They're telling crazy jokes, but we can be better than them by staying on principle, like early Rothbard. So let's not worry about, random. Let's not worry about the Tower Gang, and let's actually make a good show.
Well, 4 quick things to respond to that, and then I'll move on. The first thing is, if he doesn't want to be called a Nazi, he should stop associating with people who talk like them. The second thing is, the general thing is, I'll be responding to some of that in separate videos, but the streams won't be about that. We had our one stream sort of dismissing that. The second thing is, the third thing, I can count. You should you should come with like a bunch of Mises quotes that you hand pick, so that you can be an actual Mises Caucus member and see how long it takes for one of the Mises Caucus members to blow a blood vessel when you start saying words. That would be funny.
Like a mosh.
Yes,
That
like
was kind
hyper
of
a mosh.
Okay, I'll say this. For the record, I was at that room. I was in Nevada. People started to boo. I'm like, guys, you're booing Mises. That if the Mises Caucus boos Mises, we actually have a serious problem. That's something we need to address. And there is people who are inconsistent because they constantly do culture war and the anti-woke grift. So that's something we need to fix there. Now, that being said, I still think, after looking at everything, I'm going to support Michael Rectenwald. I'm going to support Clint for VP, because Clint has been good on foreign policy. He's been good on monetary theory. He's been good on a lot of stuff. Do I have huge disagreements? I don't like anybody in the Republican Party at all except Thomas Massey. Thomas Massey's a libertarian. And
wait, what's wrong with Amash?
Huh?
What's wrong with Amash? Isn't he still a Republican?
I don't know. He's running for Congress.
Yeah, I think he's a Republican running for Senate right now.
I don't know.
Huh.
Oh, yeah, he is. Yeah, he is.
Anyway, so generally though, like, this stream will be focused on Paleo, not LP stuff.
Yeah, so.
But Rose, and then we'll go to Lizards, Hody, and then me.
So I'm Rose, anarchist without adjectives, part-time big L libertarian. If things go according to plan, I should be in DC in a couple days. I had not intended to get caught up in all this recent drama, but it looks like it might be too late to pull out now, so...
That's what a lot of fathers said.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll see where this goes.
Okay, so, like, and just to be clear, yeah, I still hold the beliefs I hold, but, like, I don't want every stream to just be like that, because it shouldn't be. But
I want to say one.
I stand by everything that I said there, and this is just the sort of consequence of being positively affiliated with me. You'll eventually get affiliated with, like, a bunch of, like, noise when people who don't have arguments against me are angry anyway. Like, and Leighton specifically is saying that he's not going to give an argument because I don't value the person making it, because he couldn't actually disprove what I was saying. So,
But the only thing I don't like the big thing is have an argument on anything. I don't like taking screenshots from a conversation unless it's something you're giving investigation.
It depends on the situation. No. Like, it seemed like it was fairly innocent. If someone is sharing actual personal information, yes, I would not think highly of someone who shared, like, actual.
This was my proof that he ghosted me, and then like made fucking, like, he started like that whole shit by responding to your totally reasonable concerns by saying that people should suck his dick. And then I proved that he was not willing to have a mature conversation and fucking ghosted me for 6 months. So no, I stand fucking behind sharing those screenshots.
I have a strong thing about sharing DMs that unless it's for like an investigation of some sorts with private police, not even public police, like a detective,
If
that you don't.
he responded to my DMs, I wouldn't have fucking sent them. If he responded to my DMs and we scheduled things over the last 6 months rather than the shit that happened, I would not have fucking done that. So let me be super clear, I was not wrong in doing that. If he wants to make jokes about me sucking his dick, then he can get my DMs. That's it. That's all he's gonna get. Them DMs.
I still, okay, I mean, you did what you did. I can't take it back. But what I'm going to say is, like, I'm not a fan of screenshotting.
I'm not a fan of talking shit about people you won't invite on your show.
I mean, keep it. What I would say is, like, if I like
love how
Matt,
this is what we're talking about now rather than the actual fucking subject because you want to defend your guys.
Right, let's drop it then.
So, Hody.
But that's what I want to say.
I'm used to this just being kind of a brief introduction, but I mean, are we doing full opening statements? I'm Hody Johns. I'm with the Love First Christians. Shouldn't be a surprise. I definitely oppose the paleo strategy. I love cultural libertarianism. I love individual freedoms. I love people being able to do what God made them to do. And I'm not selling my neighbor out for anything. They might say, oh, but if you only sell out all the trans people or all the immigrants or all this, then we're actually going to have no war. We're actually going to have no, it's never happened. The paleos have done this. What's funny is this is the second time we've tried this. Even Lou Rockwell himself was like, this is a failure. We all came off as like racist bigots. Like this is from Lou Rockwell. And so if Lou Rockwell's like, we're all coming off as racist here, there's going to be a pretty big problem, right? So once again, we're trying it again. Let's sacrifice cultural libertarianism in order to achieve something that everybody else says is important, but whether it's the conservatives or you look at the Democrats that do the same thing, or the libertarians who slip into that tanky pipeline. Once again, what do they think? Oh, if only we give the Democrats this, maybe we give them all our guns, maybe we give them some centralized economy, maybe we give this, maybe we give them health care, and then we'll all have all this liberty. No, the left wing won't do it. The right wing won't do it. This isn't just like immediate history like Lou Rockwell and Rothbard. This goes on for hundreds of years. There's a liberty movement. The conservative establishment or the liberal establishment makes a great pitch and says, hey, if you sell out just a couple of your neighbors, you're going to get so much in return. They never do it. Don't take them up this time. You shouldn't have taken them up on it last time. Just ask Mises about that, who actually did briefly go, yay, fascism, till he was like, oh, fascism. Shouldn't have done that. Listen, I like Mises. He regretted it. Good. More people should do that.
Right on.
Lizard.
I'm gonna say.
Then we'll
I'm
get to
Lizard
opening statement.
Jesus. I am an ego com. I'm not a very big fan of the paleo strategy for obvious reasons. I'm not a big fan of like the idea of them forming like a covenant community where they're allowed to be racist among each other. It doesn't sit right with me. So, anyways, that's why I'm here. I don't really know much about paleo libertarianism other than like that tends to be the culture. So,
all right. So,
all right.
Real quick.
Can I make
I'm going to throw it to Kareem because he had something he wanted to say in response to the other, like to Hody, and then I'll sort of start to get into the format of the show, which is we're going to go over specific key points in the paleo strategy, and we're going to get to like each of these points, we'll discuss them. So you don't even need to have had information about the paleo strategy, and you can like give your take on how the paleo strategy works, like after you hear it. So with that being said, you wanted to respond to Hody, Kareem? Like keep it brief, and then we'll get into the rest of the
Yeah, I'm not responding to Hody. I'm just actually endorsing somebody. So I've looked at all the libertarian candidates you've invited me to Lars Mapstead, look at their history, look at what they've done as people, and then looked at their political positions in contrast with that to make an actual informed decision without jumping the gun. Now, it's probably going to be Michael Rechtenwald or Oliver, which I can support both, but I have disagreements with both. But if I had to really go ahead and pick one, I would, and I'm still endorsing Joshua Smith. We disagree on, not on abortion, but if somebody should be arrested for that, I don't think they should. I think they should get a second chance, especially if it's stillborn rape or something like that. But overall, I have listened to all of them, and Joshua Smith is very, very good, not only at debating, at orating, and doing everything else. People are concerned he wouldn't finish the campaign because he didn't finish his VP thing, but he had family obligations, and I can respect that, just like Dave Smith. So if Joshua Smith does get enough delegates and is able to do so, then I want to, if he watches this, I'm going to send him a thing, I would definitely support him for president now and in the future, because I actually think he would be the one guy who's principled on just about everything else, even if we have a slight disagreement on abortion or not. So I want to wish Joshua Smith the best of luck, and also Clint Russell for being principled, even though I have disagreements with him as well, on immigration, on working with Republicans, and on maybe some culture war stuff.
Well, just to be, so first off, like a sort of a brief response that might piss off the right people. Joshua Smith is way better than Rechtenwald, and the fact that Rechtenwald keeps on fucking smearing his lizardy tongue all over the fucking concept is saying that he's the only anti-state candidate. He can go fuck himself. And Joshua Smith
Rechtenwald doesn't believe that people should be arrested for abortion, as far as I know.
Yeah,
I think he's personally against it, which is perfectly compatible with libertarianism. But watching the anti-abortion crowd try to shoehorn that position into libertarianism is always hilarious because of the huge amount of cope involved.
Well,
like, you can be personally opposed to something, that's just fine, but it's funny watching them get themselves worked up and overcome by emotion on that particular thing. I'm just saying, I think Rechtenwald actually, I think he has potential as a libertarian personally. I like him as a person, so
well,
yeah, I'm going to have to disagree with Kareem there. He's probably who I would endorse.
Well, if I were to endorse anyone, even though I don't do this shit and I'm not involved in the party, and I think people shouldn't be. I think that it's a waste of everything. But like fucking Hornberger, probably the most consistent person, who has like the most actual.
He refuses though to participate in their stupid pay-to-play scheme.
Yes.
Like, he's taking a principled stance. It'd be nice if the rest of them did, but they won't. So
yeah,
we're probably not going to get to vote for him. Because I do like him.
Yeah.
I feel like he is one of the most consistent libertarians.
Like, he's actually principled. That's not what Clint is. Jacob is principled. Clint is not. But I
think Clint is, but
he's not. Well, I guess then, we'll go Hody. Who would you go with if you had to?
Oh, I mean, I've said it online. I've said it publicly. I know Chase Oliver personally, so that's bias, and it's a great bias. So something I love about Chase is he's a revolutionary. There are very few people that will do the work that I do that also run for some type of political position. When my experience with Chase is that this is a guy who gets on the streets. I mean, this is a guy who is tear gassed. This is a guy who is not afraid to, he believes it, and he's willing to risk his freedom and his life for it. My experience with him is somebody who, cops are yelling at you, stop, don't do this, we will arrest you. They weren't threatening to fire, but they certainly were like, hey, disperse, we'll arrest you. And Chase and I kept going. And it's the type of work that I've done in my community, and it's not for everybody. And it is for, there's a few hardcore active people, I won't lie. A lot of them sometimes feel they don't have a lot left to live for. It's usually a lot of desperate people. But Chase is somebody that's on the side of the desperate people, on the side of people who are harmed. What I encourage with Chase, look at his COVID policy and look at when he spoke out against those mandates and lockdowns. When everybody else was kind of pussyfooting around it and not sure if they should dive on in, Chase was like, absolutely no mandates. He stood with the truckers. Absolutely no, none of that. And people should be, make their own decisions, do what's wise for them personally. But he's completely against that. I love him as a person. That's what I can say. As far as Rechtenwald, we've talked about this before. So I guess since we've cracked the pot on the subject, I don't understand how people can get over the line. It's constant. It's not like a couple. It's how he left his last job. It's the burner social media account. It's what happened to his new social media account. It's I never supported Trump. And then of course, publicly, right? Nationally televised him supporting Trump. And then was like, well, I just meant financially. And then he released, this is public information, Mike. Publicly, he donated a ton of money to Trump. And he's like, well, I just did that to go against because I didn't like the impeachment. The donations were before the impeachment. Michael Heiss sells Rechtenwald, literally, like, listen to him. Every time he brings it up, he's like, we need a man who can stand up and tell the truth. Tough truths, right? This is a man who can't tell the truth about, like, slightly embarrassing situations in his history. Michael Rechtenwald is robbing people who might have thought like him. And instead of saying, I used to think like you, let me help you get on the Liberty wagon, what he's saying is, I never thought like you. I don't know what you're talking about. The lies are so ridiculous. And the thing is he's like, he admits himself, like, and people of this campaign, like, he's baby steps into anarcho-capitalism. Let's have our presidential candidate be somebody who's not on their baby steps and somebody who's like a total badass like Chase, as opposed to like Chase staring down tear gas, willing to get arrested by cops in order to oppose mandates, in order to feed the homeless, versus Michael Rechtenwald. Oh, I don't know if people will trust me or believe me because I donated to Trump an awful lot. I better lie about it over and over and over again. When somebody tells the truth and who actually means it, face all the press.
Was he advised to lie about that, or was he just, afraid that, people might judge him for it? Because I agree. I think he should just be honest about it. Yeah, I mean, look. As someone who also came from the left, people who come from the left and are driven away by, the mainstream performative woke, social justice warrior type crap. I mean, it's so common for them to go through a reactionary phase. It's basically expected. So, like, that's not something he should be judged for. So, but he should just be honest about it, I think. But I mean, I get it, but I think he should be honest about it. But I mean, as
then he
for
should
Chase,
say I was scared of the
left.
left.
Chase,
then he should say
I've met him, I've talked to him, I don't have anything against him. I agree. Yeah, Rechtenwald should probably just, be honest about his background.
Well, I think the issue with Rechtenwald, okay, here's what I've seen. I think he's good on if he maintains his positions, if he maintains good consistency, and he does what he follows through what he says. Yes. Now, Chase has done some amazing things too. I'm not going to knock Chase's revolutionary stuff. But if Rechtenwald can up the energy and up the debate stuff, because Joshua Smith is very good at that. Like, to me, it's unfortunate. Tulsi Gabbard, whether I don't like her positions on Israel or the MIC, but she's correct about one thing on Joe Rogan's thing. People, when they vote, don't really look at, like, well, let me look at their foreign policy. Are they this or that? They're like, is he good looking? Oh, okay, woo. Or is she good looking? Cool. Do they speak well? Oh, he speaks well. Are they smooth? Like, people liked Obama, whatever you want to say, and Obama was a terrible president. And I regret voting for him. He didn't end a war in 2000. It was the first time I really voted. Or 2012, rather. But Obama didn't do anything good. But he was a smooth talker, good, people probably said that. And same with Gavin Newsom. I'm like, how does Gavin Newsom keep winning? And I talked to an LP dude in California. They're like, well, women think he's good looking. And I'm like, yeah, but his principles suck. They're like, They don't look into that. They don't look into that. It's not like they're like, well, let me see. They just say, oh, and then they can spend more money. So those three things. Now, I'm not saying we're going to outspend RFK or Trump or Biden, but if we can keep a good, I guess, put some emotion into it.
My
problem is,
if Mike could be like, not Lichtenwald for a second, like he just spends so much time like stuttering and fucking up his words and sounding like a used car salesman and licking his lips like a lizard. I call him Michael Lichtenwald because he can't stop licking.
Just he must be very popular then in the right circle.
Yeah, right? He's got to find that kind of woman or man. And like he spends all of his time just like greasy. He's greasy, like in terms of general demeanor. And then like he's not
He's a nerd. He's an academic nerd. Like I met him and I'm like, oh, hello, fellow academia dwelling nerd.
Well, and I found out one of the reasons that he is the way he is. I guess we're getting into this, but like we'll keep this because I don't maybe 6 more minutes. But like the general thing that like, because I'm assuming Keith and Lizard don't even have an opinion on this because they're like fuck all politics and politicians. But like what I'll say in this regard is I found out why his campaign is so fucking like stulted, why he's so bad at like actually making principled and consistent stands, and it's because his campaign manager is literally a Russophile. And she fucking runs this website where she does nothing but suck like Russian cock and Trump cock. And like literally look, Russiagate was a hoax. There was no Trump-Russia collusion, but this site makes it look like there is, because it's nothing but like Trump is doing great things, and also Putin just liberated more regions, and it's all that, and it's all that kind of thing. And this is the woman running Mike Rechtenwald's campaign. You can find more information about her like on LegitGov on Twitter, but that's apparently what that is. So I don't like that shit. I don't like and like when I confronted her about this, she said that it was to own the libs or whatever, something like that. It was very something stupidy. Yeah.
I will say this: when they call me and talk, I'm going to bring everything out here. When they call me and told me about Michael Rechtenwald, they say, "Oh, he's dedicated to defeating, like the wokeness or something like that." To me, that doesn't have any substance, because half of these woke people are pro-Zionist or pro-military industrial complex. So to me, they're worse than the things that they actually claim to be against. And there is some validity to caring about people, which I would call, I don't call it woke. I like the term deep ecology, caring about living things and people, and even things that are not living in the environment. So there are people who actually do have legitimate concerns about oppressed minority groups and things like that. There's some people who do perform it, but the people who are anti-woke try and sell books and stuff like that. Cynthia Reitchick, James Lindsay.
Chaya Reitchick.
They're just two sides of the same coin. They're both equally annoying.
And like here's here's the other half of that. Nobody's gonna call themselves a deep ecologist, and the like guy who founded that term as a term is a massive transphobe. So I don't actually care about that term. I think that term is one of those terms nobody's going to use. Nobody's going to say, yes, I'm a deep ecologist, rather than saying they're woke.
What's that even supposed to mean? Okay.
No, that's the thing. You have to start like really explaining a bunch of deep ideas in order to explain something like deep ecology, and it's not useful as a term because of that. Like, if you have to spend a huge amount of time really getting nailed down into the basics of what you're talking about, it's not a useful thing to use as a replacement for a popular term. It's a useful thing to say, like, I am this, and here's why you should want to be this as well. But it's not useful to say that this is a good substitute for the word woke, because nobody's going to give a shit about deep ecology.
Okay. It depends.
I'll say this.
Yeah.
I think the whole anti-culture, I think the culture war grift is old. It's dead. The anti-woke grift is not helping anybody here. So if I like Joshua Smith's style, but if Rechtenwald gets it, I think that's good. He should just amp up the energy, amp up the emotion, and I disagree with the libertarian thing of just giving everybody a test in economics. Put some emotion into it. And yes, maybe quote Irico Malatesta once in a while, because that will get a crowd going a lot quicker.
Maybe he should wear some chapstick so that he doesn't have to lick his lips.
I'm not going to comment on
I
that.
think
But
it's just a nervous habit, okay?
Up the emotion. Up the emotion at quote Malatesta once in a while. If I can hear somebody if I can hear him say, like, by the definition, anarchist is he who does not wish to be oppressed, not wishing himself to be an oppressor, he who wants the greatest well-being and freedom for all human beings. His ideas, his wishes have their origin, feeling of sympathy, love, and respect for humanity. If he can do stuff like that, I think he'll grab a lot of people. That's why.
He has the ability to get passionate about things, but yeah.
He shouldn't be nervous, though. That's one of the things. He shouldn't be so nervous that he's constantly licking his lips. That he should be to the point where he can speak publicly and confidently while not displaying constant nervous tics. Like that, if you're gonna be ruling a country, don't do that shit. Anyway,
oh, I suppose you could do so much better.
Probably. I mean,
yeah, you should run for president. Yes.
Well, maybe when I'm actually I've sort of floated the idea in certain places because it'd be funny, but maybe I'll be the actual presidential age next cycle though. I'm not that yet. I'll be 30. I'll be 32 tomorrow though. So if anybody wants to sub to my Patreon for that, then they can do that. Point is that you should be a very confident public speaker because you're going to be going up against fucking actual world leaders. You should be able to say words to those world leaders without feeling like you're prepping your fuckhole. It's not good.
Like Biden committing genocide.
So
we can move to the Paleo strategy. That's all I had to say. But just in the interest of keeping or getting into the Paleo strategy, I think the libertarians were most principled when they understood Austrian economics. And like Roderick T. Long says, that if someone was going to give me political truth on an elevator, it's Roderick T. Long or Kevin Carson. And it's just Austrians are right about economics, the Greek philosophers, and I would actually add the left libertarians are right about everything else, human endeavors. So I like the Austrian side. Let's keep the market free. I should be able to take rocks out of my backyard and say this is a pet rock and charge $200 for it and make a living. And I should also then say, hey, I'm going to give that money to rebuild Gaza, to help with trans rights, to help with any minority group that does need it, and that we don't need government of any form. And if we believe in actual multipolarity, to me, multipolarity is not Russia, China, Brazil, and India. It's different neighborhoods with different cultural and economic ideas, like in Mexico, like neo-Zapatismo, Chiron, and maybe Anarcho-Poco. And I think if we follow early Rothbard methods, we can create societies like that. They'll be more wealthy, but even to counter, because me and Jack Lloyd have had discussions about that, it's not about trying to be more wealthy. Rothbard said anarcho-capitalism was his choice because it was the most ethical system, not the one that makes the most money. So if we can recognize that and say we'd be freer, even if we don't make as much money, I'm down with that. So and that's the Paleo.
We've got multiple chat comments, just two that I'm going to address. First off, we got Minty saying, hello. Paleos that I've interacted with have had some very yikes views, definitely, especially since, you're trans and they don't like trans people a lot of the time. The modern Paleos are almost always the anti-woke grift kind of crowd. And then Reinhold in chat, first off, I wanted to say, I want to get you and Archie and a bunch of other people on for sort of, a counter-conventional thing on next Sunday to do the second part of the Paleo strategy stream. Because this is primarily I wanted to get the views of people who aren't going to be here next Sunday. So if you've got time, I definitely want you involved in that next conversation. Also, his comment is you can't run for president if you aren't at least 70, and that's probably true. So
Technically not true, but in the real world, probably true.
yeah, like for all practical purposes, that's a fact. It's a factical pract. All right, so the first thing is I'm not gonna get into the full-on like thing here because like the fucking Rockwell Rothbard report thing where this thing first got posted. It's got this whole big thing where like the first part of it bemoans the failures of David Duke. So I think that's fucking evil, but I don't think we really have time to get into that in the like hour and 15 basically we have left. Either way, the thing that I want to get into, and we'll get into, I guess, more of that cultural aspect of it next week because of that. I want to talk about the planks primarily, and if we have more time after, we can talk about stuff later. But the Paleo strategy, for those of you who don't know, was a strategy implemented by Rothbard, late Rothbard, where he's like, fuck all this working with the left shit, I'm only going to work with, like, basically authoritarian rightists, and I'm going to try to appeal to them in every way possible so that I can get them on board with enough of my libertarian ideals that maybe we can run Pat Buchanan or some shit and get people in office. Which didn't work, and, you know, I can't stress enough, it didn't work, but it's what he wanted to do. So, but like, let's start off with the planks themselves here. The plank section of this really old fucking thing that I'm reading columns out of a shit with because that's how newsletters were set up. A right-wing populist program then must concentrate on dismantling the crucial existing areas of state and elite rule, and on liberating the average American from the most flagrant and oppressive features of that rule. In short, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to say a thing. I'm going to read the full paragraph and section, and then we can go for a round table sort of thing on each thing and really hammer down some stuff. Because some of this stuff is actually good. Some of this stuff is stuff we can agree to. And then it gets into some right-wing cocksucking. So, without further ado, yeah, there's an HTML version, but there's something about reading the original, because Reinhold's in the chat. There's an HTML version. There are easier to read versions, but there's something about this that keeps me in the right headspace if I'm reading old evil shit. So I want to keep in that negative headspace of this is how the people would have seen it at the time. So I'm going to read this awkward bullshit in this way in order to make sure that my brain is like, because I'm psychologically damaged and I keep it that way. Anyway, go ahead.
What I was going to say is the issue I have with paleo conservatism and also paleo libertarians is that Uncle Ted made a pretty good point, is that as technology advances, as society advances, and I don't see that slowing down actually to his discredit, but I see this point to his credit as you keep going on and on and on. There's what are traditional, they always say like traditional values, which I can agree some way, but I agree in some aspects. Okay, some tradition is needed, but I don't see it ever being static. And the idea that these people are going to keep things static, like let's keep America in the 1950s, there's a lot of problems in the 1950s.
Yeah.
They just have a romanticized version of it. Like, oh, the 1950s was a good time, in my opinion, post-World War II for free market and economic stuff. We hadn't got off the gold standard. So, yeah, that was good. But it was also
that's
good
not
if you were
actually
black
true, though.
or gay. Huh?
That's not actually true.
Yeah, it was a very abnormal, time period.
Yeah, like they had
people who grew up there or were born then just happened to inherit a really good economy.
Yeah,
where there was still a surplus. The economy was there were far fewer regulations, so if you wanted to start a business or something, you were free to do that.
But you also had a shit ton of government money.
My argument is
people who were born then, they got this idea that basically, if you worked hard enough, you actually could make something of yourself. So they got this idea that, okay, all you need to do to succeed is work hard. And that's so like my dad, for example, is the quintessential boomer, started with very little, went to college, got financial aid when it was only like a couple $100 per semester and could be paid for with a part-time job, then graduated. Jobs were pretty easy to get back then. Guess he met some guy at a job fair who took money out of his own wallet and gave it to my dad so he could fly to the city that I still reside in to interview for the position. And yeah, like you could save for a down payment on a house within a couple of years of getting your first job. You could basically, you had to work, but you could actually save up for things and make something of yourself. And then, so now they act like that's still the case. Like you just have to work harder. We had to struggle. Okay, you struggled, but there was actually an end in sight. Like you could, going without certain luxuries for a few years was actually tolerable because you knew you were making progress towards saving up for the down payment on a house and improving your condition. Okay, that's not the case anymore. Now houses, like a house that was $200,000 a couple years ago is now $500,000. Okay, you cannot keep up with that. Okay, people have just kind of resigned themselves to never owning anything, not even being able to rent a 1-bedroom apartment on one income. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and like Reinhold in chat comes with a good point where you could, if you were white, there were programs that were limited to white people in white communities. And like, that's true. And like, one of the things you'll hear from a lot of black people is 40 acres and a mule. And that's a reference to the fact that they didn't get any, like, they didn't get any of the land or the whatever they were promised that was supposed to like make up for slavery. So they didn't build up generational wealth. And then when they did eventually start to build anything for themselves, Black Wall Street was torched based on a lie. Philly Move was bombed based on a lie. And a bunch of other shit happened that consistently cripples black communities when they try to start because white people didn't like.
Was weaponized.
Yeah. And that's helping build the border right now. And so the general thing that I could say about that, like, not only is Reinhold dead on the money there, but like also fucking, to be very specific, when we're talking about like the 50s, they had a bunch of government money. They weren't actually like on the gold standard. The gold standard had already been displaced before, like, as part of economic sort of resettlement things, and also they stole people's gold in World War II, I think it was. Like, they just told, if you've got a certain amount of gold, we're going to take that gold from you and use it to fund the war machine. So it's like, no, they weren't off the gold standard. The creature on Jekyll Island was born in 1913. It's not like this, like, so when the gold standard, or sorry, they weren't on the gold standard. When the gold standard was taken off, like decades before, like Reagan, like, or Nixon put the final sort of kibosh on that, that was like, you know, just the final nails in the existing coffin it had already been laid in. It's not like the gold standard was still fucking there in the 50s. It wasn't. So the economic prosperity was, if you were like one of the classes that the American government favored, yeah, sure, you might get yours. If you weren't, fuck off. And if you don't, we'll oppress you and jail you and create a crack epidemic so that we can use you as prison labor and a bunch of other shit. And it's like, no, it's never been good. It's never been good. There is no time to return to. And the 50s, even in their, like, even if we went back there, it would only be ideal for some of them. And let's face it, a lot of the people who want the paleo strategy don't fucking work very hard themselves. So they wouldn't be one of the people that pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. They'd be lucky to end up with a trailer by mid-80s. So
because they think that a lot of times they get their causes mixed up. Like, they think that if they could just return to what they thought was one of these more simple times, it would be easier to make something of themselves. Like, I've seen tons of people blame, it's, feminism's fault that wages are depressed and are not keeping up with productivity because women flooded the workplace and lowered wages. Or, well, okay, no, more women had to go into the workforce because the currency was being devalued and single income homes were no longer a thing because they couldn't be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of
That's
course, like migrants took our jobs, but we're not going to look into how those migrants needed to migrate because of all the wars that the U.S. still kept amped up in order to keep fueled things like the CIA and FBI and all this shit, because those things were like sort of vestigial after certain points, and they needed excuses to keep going when they didn't have like, you know, the post-World War II bullshit and all this other shit as like an excuse to like invade motherfuckers. So they like, and you know, police domestically. And so they made a bunch of bullshit up and they funded a bunch of bad people. And then you suddenly have all these fucking problems that they created, and they're suddenly self-justified. And so it's like these people like created the migrant problem, you know, and created the domestic terror problem by funding terror cells all around the world and sometimes actively creating them here. And now they're complaining about migrants because they're evil.
Yeah.
You
So
look like you wanted to say something about that, Keith.
Well, just the standard comments. After World War II, the reason the United States became economically dominant, because in the late 40s, the United States controlled 50% of the world economy. But the reason for that was that the Americans killed off all their economic competitors in the war. You know, it's no different when the mafia gets, you know, when the mafia comes to dominate, you know, rackets because they've eliminated rival crime families. Well, that's how the Americans got to be the dominant world economic power.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the world of the 1950s, what else was there? You had a bunch of, you know, Western European and East Asian countries that had been laid to waste by bombing, right? And then you had the Stalinist model of economy that was in Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and then later China and Korea and some other places. And then you had other countries that were pre-industrial countries at the time. Most of those were colonies or former colonies of the European countries. And what happened is that when all the European colonial powers were destroyed in the two world wars, the Americans inherited those and became the like the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, the French Empire, the Italian Empire. All of those became part of the American neo-colonial system. So the Americans created this in the sphere of the world that the Americans controlled. They created this neo-colonial system in the post-war period, and that was what the Bretton Woods system and all of that was.
NATO, the Trilateral Commission.
Yeah. Well, there's a vast, you know, international institutional apparatus behind that. That's how
the Anglo-American establishment, as that book writes.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So that and as far as the, you know, I mean, the United States monopolized world trade during that time period, and then they started to cultivate Europe and East Asia as export markets and labor markets, and then those places started to catch up, where Japan for a time became a competitor with the United States, and then Europe got back on its feet economically, and then during that same time period, one of you, I think Rose mentioned earlier that the currency devaluation that happened in the early 70s was what caused the inflation crisis of the late 70s. Like a lot of people who were from that time period will blame Jimmy Carter for the inflationary crisis of the late 70s, but it was actually Nixon's policies. Like Nixon had this idea he was going to create a lot of artificial prosperity to ensure his reelection. And what he did was he started pursuing all these inflationary monetary policies. I mean, you don't have to be an expert in economics to know this. Just look it up on Investopedia. On Investopedia, they've got very elaborate, detailed articles describing how this worked. But when the inflationary policies that the Nixon administration pursued were then combined with the impact of the OPEC embargo, because Nixon was arming the Israelis in the Yom Kippur War in '73, and in retaliation for that, OPEC, they imposed a fuel embargo in the United States, which meant the United States had a fuel shortage, and in return, and then that had the effect of amping up inflation even more. So between the Nixon's own inflationary policies and the embargo, inflation went through the roof in the early '70s. Like, I remember it because back then, in '73, there was actually a rule that the government put into place where you could only buy gasoline on certain days of the week. Like if the last number on your license plate was an odd number, you could only buy gas on odd days of
Rationing.
the month. Yeah, so they had fuel rationing for a time. So between the fuel crisis and the inflationary monetary policies, inflation started to go crazy in the 70s, and then they started doing all these dumbass ways of trying to control inflation, like trying to push people to spend less. Like they used to the government used to give out buttons called that said "Win with inflation now." I used to have one. I used to wear it to school, but and so inflation started. I mean, if inflation had kept going like it was in the 70s, we would have had a Weimar type situation in the United States. Like the value of the dollar was cut in half from roughly the mid 70s to the early 80s. That's how bad the inflation was. Yeah. And then you had another fuel crisis in the late 70s after the Iranian Revolution too. So yeah, so inflation went crazy. So that the United States has never recovered from that. I mean, that was really the beginning of the end as far as all this 1950s, 1960s prosperity. That's when the inflation really started to. That's when the U.S. economy generally started to go under, and then Reaganism and everything that's come since then built on that. You know, they like the way that they got inflation under control was that under Paul Volcker, they in 79 and 80 they jacked up interest rates to about 20.5%, right? So that got the inflation under control, and then the U.S. economy got plunged into a recession where we had about a 10% unemployment rate in the early 80s. And then the Reaganites turned around and they did massive investment in military and armaments production, and that was a stimulus to get the economy booming again, or well, I mean, relatively speaking, at least got them reelected. But then that's how we started to get this spiraling national debt that we have now. They've kept the same system ever since then. This kind of deficit, debt-driven economy. So and then in the 90s you had neoliberalism. You had neoliberalism was introduced with the all these lopsided trade agreements and that kind of stuff. So
we had neoliberalism all up until then too. Like I qualify all of that as neoliberalism. Like Chile with Augusto Pinochet, right. Thatcher, Reagan, Nixon. It's all neoliberalism because it's like, let's take the values espoused by classical liberals, jack it up to industrial complexes, institute a bunch of state spending, and force people onto the new program via like soft power mechanisms and International Monetary Fund and all the World Bank will force you through like either destroying your country actively or regime change or economic force or trade tariffs and sanctions and embargoes and shit. We'll do all of this in order to force you onto our program and install our own people in your place. That's neoliberalism 101. That's Naomi Klein's, shock doctrine 101. And like, to me, that started in like the 50s. So to me,
well, they started developing the paradigm for that.
Yeah.
Nixon was something of a transition president. He was one that was to implement a lot of this stuff, and then in the late 70s, early 80s, they started to really amp it up.
Yeah. So, first off, Rose, do you mind? I don't know, is that knocking around in the background? But the general vibe, like, so we've now basically established what paleo is. So the general vibe going forward, I want to start talking about the individual components, because we are going to agree on some of these, and it starts off kind of strong in the we are going to agree like sort of bracket. So I want to start off by saying I'm not sort of like one of those dogmatic people. I'm not going to universally pan all of this, but it's pretty bad when you get down into it. And the point that I want to raise is that the paleo strategy itself is a problem because it sounds good in some libertarian ways, and so it sounds like it's compatible, and then it absolutely is not. So the first thing that it says here, slash taxes. Good. all taxes, sales, business, property, etc., but especially the most oppressive politically and personally, the income tax. We must work toward repeal of the income tax and the abolition of the IRS. Anybody here have a problem with that?
Sorry about that. Hopefully that took care of all the noise.
It should be fine. And it wasn't too much of a problem, but like, so slash taxes. All taxes, sales, business, property, etc., but especially the most oppressive politically and personally, the income tax. We must work toward repeal of the income tax and the abolition of the IRS. Who here disagrees with that? Assuming none of us. Lizard is not saying anything. Everybody else is shaking their head. So we'll move on.
Do not
Just ask if
disagree.
there's an objection and then say hearing none. Let's move
right?
on.
So slash welfare. Get rid of underclass rule by abolishing the welfare system or, short of abolition, severely cutting and restricting it. Underclass rule! Isn't that fucking hilarious?
So it's not that it's wrong, it's that it's focusing on the wrong thing. Like, that's... I would focus on corporate welfare long before I'd focus on, like, individual welfare. And then there's a right way to sell this to the public, and there's a wrong way. The right way is to point out, you know, how inefficient and corrupt state-run welfare programs are, and then explain to people how much better things like mutual aid and lodge medicine and other voluntary community-based systems are. You know, explain to people how common these things used to be before they were regulated out of existence and the state took over and got people dependent on their shitty versions of these systems. I guess my point is, yeah, this is not something we should be focusing. We should not be focusing on food stamps before we focus on corporate welfare.
Then you're gonna hate one of the later planks. Anybody
I'm
else
sure I
got?
will.
Anybody else got words for underclass rule?
How you frame this is extremely important. In fact, I could combine this with the first plank about taxes. Like, if you take the point of view that if you just say, well, we're going to cut taxes and cut welfare, then you're just going to be co-opted by Republicans.
Yes.
It's going to sound like Ronald Reagan, all right? But so the way to frame it is we're going to cut taxes from the bottom up and cut welfare from the top down, with the end game being we're going to get rid of all of it, right? But we're going to start off by cutting military welfare and welfare to foreign governments that engage in genocide. All right, that's the first step. And then we start cutting welfare to corporations and banks and governments and other elite institutions. And then, you know, the people on food stamps or whatever they call that now, that'll be the very last thing, you know. And then, and the same thing with taxes. We start cutting taxes from the bottom up, you know, and then we'll eliminate taxes on the Rockefellers at the very end of the game. Although I don't think the Rockefellers could exist in a stateless economy, but
No.
that's a separate question. But
Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Thiel.
Yeah, yeah.
That amount of wealth accumulation in a free market is just not possible.
Tain't feasible. Go ahead.
But yeah, so I mean, cut taxes from the bottom up, cut welfare from the top, or I wouldn't call it welfare. I'd call it subsidies or spending.
Yes.
Cut spending from the top down, cut welfare. I mean, cut taxes from the bottom up. If you frame it that way, then what you're doing is you're using a libertarian economic paradigm, but you're inverting the conservative paradigm.
Right.
If you just say, well, we want to cut taxes and welfare, then you're just going to sound like, you know, Rush Limbaugh or something, RIH.
Which late Rothbard sounded like Rush Limbaugh, but
yeah.
Okay, not that bad, but yes.
You're right. That's because
we generally don't talk about late Rothbard. It is too bad, but yeah.
What I'll say about the paleo strategy, though, is that what Rothbard and Lou Rockwell were trying to do was revive the old right from the pre-World War II era. And one of their motivations for doing that was that the old right was comparatively more anti-war. I mean, they weren't pacifists, but they were more like isolationists. They were far more hesitant to get involved in, military crusading internationally. And that was a big thing for Rothbard. So that was a big part of their reason for developing this framework. Although the way they went about it was, screwed sideways. But the motivations were not all, impure.
Anybody?
Right, yeah. It's not because they were driven by pure racism or something like detractors try to frame it as. Yeah, they had valid reasons, and they had valid reasons for distancing themselves from the left, which had, for the most part, the mainstream left by that point had just gone completely statist. So I understand why it seemed like a viable strategy at the time, but this far in the future, looking back at it and looking at why it didn't work, it's a stupid idea to try to repeat it.
Anybody else have anything to say about underclass rule before we move on?
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that motivation, like policy sounds good, but motivation is what actually gets legislated. So when the idea behind the legislation is to legislate the underclass out, when then what you're going for is punishment, as opposed to saying, hey, like Rose said earlier, there's a better way to feed these people. I'm compassionate about them. In this case, it's actually literally written into it that it's like, we hate these people. We're sick of their rulership over us, right? Like super eye rolling nowadays.
Ayn Rand bullshit.
Well, yeah. And so you just kind of like, all right, so the thing is the motivation is what actually ends up getting legislated. And so this is something that we need to remember throughout history, is a lot of times we say, well, we agree on this policy point, but for the wrong reasons, right? Like, for example, why Candace Owens supports freedom for Palestine. Is this a good ally for us, a bad ally for us? Well, in the long term, if people like her get to control of the legislation, is the legislation going to look like liberty for people and self-autonomy? Or is it going to look like annihilation of a certain type of person? And this is the thing, is you hand your motivations up to Congress people who get to legislate it. And so when it specifically is anti-underclassmen in its words there, it's like, okay, this is wrong. Like we need to be like, hey, we love the underclass so much that we're sick of seeing them labor under this. I'd be completely on board. As soon as it's like underclass, they dominate our lives. That girl who's got 5 kids and no husband, she's killing the economy. Like I said, it's cringe-inducing now. We've learned a lot, at least we think. And so hopefully we won't do that kind of paleo thing again.
Well, let's take my strategy. I don't have a paleo strategy. I don't have a specific thing, because I think when you limit to a specific thing, you get stuck there. So give you actual examples, not just like theoretical stuff, because theory's fine. But like at the anti-war movement, the Rage Against the War Machine, I get it, there were bad characters there. But there were people, you pick a dart, you hit the political compass, whatever you want to hit. There was someone there. There was anti-war vets, there was people from the 60s, there was Vietnam vets. There were obviously libertarians, Michael Heiss was there, Ron Paul, Tulsi, all those people who were actually, even though I don't like Tulsi's takes on a lot of stuff, against the war. And then there was people who were like,
by Democrat standards, she's better. She's good by Democrat standards, which is a very low bar.
We're not going so high here. But yes, there were people who, the only people I didn't like were hey, it's an anti-war rally, I don't want the pro-Russia people there. But by every token, there were people there. So there were actual people there. Marched next to a guy with a hammer and sickle, which was kind of, I'm like, looking here. I have a crass sign in this dude. I'm like, I feel more libertarian left than this guy's authoritarian left. So, and then I met Jill Stein and Daniel McAdams within 10 seconds of each other. It was crazy. So that's cool. That's a good rally. They got the left and the right. And then I ran for school board here in my town. I ran with a Blue Dog Democrat and 2 kind of Reagan Republicans. They're not like super pro-Trump. They just, or you could even call them somewhat paleos, and they were okay. The only thing I didn't like is they're like, put the Bible back in school, which, fine. I'm not against necessarily putting the Bible back in school as long as you don't push that on people, make it optional. So, and they were actually cool with that. So I've done stuff like that. Like if local MAGA Republicans want to go for, getting less gun restrictions, cool. If the libertarian left in Pittsburgh wants to work on drug decriminalization, I think that's a good idea. as long as it's pushing towards liberty. Now, people will criticize and say, well, this person isn't good. You can't work with that. I even say, like, I agree with Keith. Like, I really don't want to work with anybody who's pro-Israel, but if there's something good to work with them on, like gun, firearms, something, then yeah. As far as who I actually would associate with and work with, it would only be the bottom spectrum. So, okay, we can work on a coalition after we get that's done. I say goodbye, they say goodbyes. But if I'm going to work with someone, it would primarily be like the libertarian left and then the libertarian right. I'm looking into, and I'm going to be on, quick plug, I guess, the skeptical leftist tomorrow. Corey Johnston, here's a small thing. I'm going to talk about Cooperation Tulsa, which is a communal social ecology project in Oklahoma. Maybe even go out there and check it out after convention. It seems really cool. So I think if we build a bunch of those type of things, we'll be better off. I don't know what strategy that would be.
Well,
I like
free
markets.
Well, we've got plenty of time to discuss that potentially on your show tomorrow. So we'll be doing that then. But the third point, because I'm pretty sure that we're done with the underclass rule point and how fucking awful that is. The point is sort of compounded on when they get extra fascist by saying now not only do the underclass rule us, but also minorities. Abolish racial or group privileges. Abolish affirmative action. Set aside racial quotas, etc., and point out that the root of such quotas is the entire civil rights structure which tramples on the property rights of every American.
This is a tough one. This is a very tough one because, like, at the heart of libertarian philosophy is freedom of association. So, when taken to its logical conclusion, yes, people theoretically do have the right to be racist pieces of shit. And we have a right to say that they're racist pieces of shit and refuse to associate with them in turn. But, yeah.
Well, and that's where I come in, like, because the whole deal for me, it's transparently, like, it's clear that what they're talking about is eliminating these quotas so that white people like us better. And because the populist right, let's be clear, was overwhelmingly white people. To me, the populist strategy was the new Southern strategy. And they were trying to get a bunch of the sorts of people who were alienated from a lot of other circles on their side. And that's why this whole thing started out by basically bemoaning the fact that they got David Duke.
Well, okay, that was an analysis that people tend to read too far into that.
But it was an analysis right before he talked about his strategy of aligning with populist rightoids.
Right.
So clearly he was trying to prime the fucking gun here.
There's another situation where there's a right way to go about this and a wrong way. Like when racism is discussed, we should talk, like when people start talking about racism in the context of libertarian philosophy, we talk about how, for example, the state has, over the past several centuries, implemented policies specifically designed to disadvantage certain, minority groups. For example, exclusionary zoning policies, occupational licensing, abuse of civil asset forfeiture. For example, there was a family in California that recently had some property restored to them after the state misused asset forfeiture to seize a successful business from a black family that was running it because they were pissed that a black family had a successful business. It's policies such as this. It's also the drug war, which was specifically designed to target certain communities. It's the fact that, even today, certain communities are far more likely to be targeted by drug prohibition or gun prohibition. We talk about things like this, not, not, for example, certain races should be prioritized for college applications or for job applications. Again, there's a correct way to talk about racial disparities, and there's a wrong way to go about it. not act like, just anti-white racism is the problem.
Hody.
Well, here's the
Sorry.
I have with that. Oh,
Either one of you.
No, it's anti-white racism. I have no problem calling it out. I don't make any bones about what's a bigger problem, but I don't want any racism. My thing is, this is typically, again, something that we say, hey, affirmative action is bad. Prioritizing these people because of their race or color of skin or something like that is racist, and it's bad, and I have no problem calling it out. The issue is that diversity is good. So at a cultural level, I still want to encourage people to embrace diversity because different schools of thought. I'll share a brief story. And unfortunately, it was because of affirmative action. But my dad, who works on aerospace, he's with Lockheed. He's in their aerospace division. That being said, obviously Lockheed has problems. I don't want to get into that. But he loves sending stuff into space. He loves designing them. And they hired somebody from Saudi Arabia who was, because he was from Saudi Arabia. And he wasn't as qualified. He didn't go to as good of schools. Of course, all these people are geniuses, right? He's just not as mega a genius as some of these other guys. And you remember, he said he brought the guy in, was like, oh no, I'm worried about it. It's an affirmative action hires. It's going to be bad. And he was like, where we come from, I'm not used to thinking about it, so that the rockets don't tilt over, right, when they're in the air. My dad would be really ashamed of me not knowing the terms, but basically so the rocket stays straight, doesn't crack in half. And he's like, we all thought about it a certain way, but then we brought him in and he had a unique way of thinking about it just because it was different. And even though he wasn't smarter than us, he was like, what if we try another solid rocket motor over on this side? And they're like, we haven't even thought to do that before. And I don't know the exact details. I'm sure I botched a lot of it. But the point is that diversity is a strength, and most businesses are aware of that. The issue is because they're soulless corporate businesses and not thinking human beings, they have a tough time being like, hey, let's make sure there's a good amount of diversity of thought. And what they do is they boil it down to make sure 10% of your people are black, 15% are Mexican, that kind of thing, right? And so they become the racists themselves, as opposed to pursuing human diversity. They actually reinforce their identity as their race, as opposed to becoming a melting pot. Yeah. So this is something that I'm rather passionate about, because I hate affirmative action because it's an attempt to corporatize something that is actually quite beautiful. It's trying to make into an equation something that's wonderful. But again, this is selling out. This is saying, hey, let's ban it. Let's use state violence to get rid of these companies that, and I will grant, do a bad job by saying, hey, let's have affirmative action as opposed to generic diversity. But then, because you trust the state to do it, I mean, look no further than what happened with the abortion stuff. They go too far. They're going to say, oh, are you even trying to have diversity? That's against the law. Let's ban those kind of things. Let's ban those practices. I don't want you saying you want to have 5% of your base be black. That's racist and wrong. And so you stick the government on them. Libertarians, don't fall into that. It's social conservatism, and individual liberties are awesome. Don't do it.
All right. Well.
All right.
Go.
Okay. No. Here's what I was gonna say. In regards to this, because this is a touchy subject, like Rose said, but I think there's a clear answer, is that when it comes to all these government programs to promote diversity, inclusivity, all that stuff, I'm not a fan of that at all, because I'm not a fan of anything the government does in and of itself. And to me, they don't care about minority groups. They're using it as a gotcha thing. They're like, oh, no, we like, gay rights. Hey, it's June. LBGT flag everywhere. Well, put it in Saudi Arabia. No. Oh, why not? Why not in Saudi Arabia? Why not in Dubai? Oh, because it's a grift. There's a funny little article, credit to Tim Pools, where I found it. And I was at the Occupy protests where it has a CEO and it has the Occupy guys introduce them to some kind of identity politics. So I don't like identity politics. I don't like any government programs to promote anybody regardless of whatever it is. Now, that being said, you take the government out of the equation, there's legitimate problems, I think. There's legitimate discrimination against people who are trans because people don't understand it. And that was something I didn't understand for a while until I met people in the movement who are, and some of Blair White's content. And then there's legitimate, in my opinion, discrimination against minority groups and a lot of stuff that happens there. There's a legitimate preference, in my opinion, to certain kinds of religious groups and certain things that is not good. So as anarchists, what we should do, and in my opinion, what would be the best thing to do, is making sure that when we have societies that are functional, that we point these things out on a local level, and then people who are not good, force them out. So what am I actually saying to do? Get the federal government out of everything, make it not exist. And if your local town, someone puts up a Nazi flag, a Zionist flag, Marxist, I don't like Marxist-Leninists particularly, be tankies, if you want to call them that, or puts up, something that is also just not good, which nothing's coming to my mind, but those three things are murderous ideologies. It's a Maoist flag, or a Maoist flag, if there is a Maoist flag, Pol Pot, Ho Chi Minh, anything like that. You tell them, hey, take that flag out. We don't want you here. Go lost, get in the woods. That would be my solution to that. Or if they say I'm anti-trans or I hate gay people, like, we don't want you in this neighborhood. And I think that's a reasonable request. I'm not saying kill them. I'm not saying beat anybody up. I'm not saying fight anybody unless they physically resist. But don't allow that stuff to be in your neighborhoods. Don't allow discrimination to be in your neighborhoods. If we follow that with good economic Austrian policy, I think we can get the best of both worlds, where we have a world that accepts people for who they are, as long as they're not hurting anybody. An Austrian thought, so they can become as prosperous without having to work a ridiculous amount to have nothing. That would be my ultimate goal. And of course, this ties into what we'll talk about tomorrow, but if they're not doing something, then you have democratic councils that can say, we all voted in favor that we don't want racial or LGBTQ discrimination in our town, so you got to get out.
All right. Well, assuming that was it, basically, we're moving on to number 4.
Hold on.
Go. Yeah.
There's a whole lot to be discussed about this issue. Like, I looked up Rothbard's old list of his Paleo platform or whatever. Yeah, the number 3 plank was abolish racial or group privileges, and the 3 things that he mentioned are affirmative action, racial quotas, and then the civil rights structure. Those are 3 separate things. The affirmative action is not necessarily a government program. It's often sponsored by institutions that are either private or semi-private. For instance, universities tend to be big on affirmative action. A lot of those are private. My take on affirmative action is that if you have an organization that's not part of the state, then you can have all the affirmative action you want. That's, whether that's a good idea or not in a different, might be a separate question, but it's not really a political issue. Now, there is the fact that, you have a lot of so-called private organizations that get a lot of money from the government, like universities that are heavily subsidized and dependent on student loans and things like that. So there's always some gray area in this. But, but affirmative action outside the state per se is not really a political issue. And the same would be true with the set-asides. The set-asides are not the same thing as affirmative action, but the set-asides basically mean that when a company gets contracts with the government to do business for whatever, then they set aside a certain number of contracts for minority-owned business. Now, the issue I see with that is that government shouldn't exist, period. And then, so therefore, government shouldn't be giving special contracts to businesses of any kind, irrespective of the color of the person that owns them.
Based in Conkenpilled.
Yeah, because what they're doing, what you're doing there is you're creating what a lot of libertarians call crony capitalism, or the mainstream term for that is public-private partnerships. But whenever you hear people talking about public-private partnership, what they mean is crony capitalism.
I just call it capitalism.
Yeah, well, it is. I mean, I do too. But yes.
Yeah, why waste a perfectly good term? Because some people misuse it nowadays. That's just capitalism. Just say free market. You mean free markets. Anyway.
Right. So the issue there is the relationship between the state and capital, period. And whatever you think of minority set-asides, that's just, if you think that's a negative, that's just an extra, late add-on, but or not, whatever. But the real issue there is the relationship between capital and the state.
Yeah.
Now the third thing is civil rights, and whenever libertarians discuss this with the left, this is one of the main objections that the left will raise to libertarianism, because when libertarians say, well, we don't believe in discrimination, prohibition, like libertarians will say, we don't think laws against discrimination should exist. Now, to most leftists and progressive types, that's like saying you don't believe in age of consent laws, right? So that's how they
Jeremy Kaufman.
That's how they take this in a moral context, whether you agree with them or not.
Oh,
that's
Kareem.
In their moral paradigm, that's how they feel about it.
Kareem, I don't know how long this has been there, but you got something in your beard.
The issue there is with I would say that if you apply libertarianism or anarchism of any kind consistently, you have to say, I think as Rose was saying, that freedom of association is a fundamental principle. So if you want to have your anarchist communes, that's that's the He-Man Woman Haters Club, or white guy He-Man Woman Haters Club, or straight white guy He-Man Woman Haters Club. Yeah, you can do that with libertarianism or anarchism or whatever. Other people can criticize it or think ill of you for it, but you can still do it. But that doesn't resolve the issue, though, because the issue there is that when you look at racial discrimination in a country like the United States, you have to see that historically the United States was organized as a racial caste system. The old school pre-1960s racism wasn't just something where you had folks that didn't like black folks, so they wouldn't let them in their bar or something like that. It was a whole lot more than that. It was more like the Indian subcontinental caste system, or like South African apartheid. This was something that was enforced in part privately, but also by law, by custom, by everything. It was the accepted norm. For example, blacks and whites were not allowed to marry. If you had government services that were provided by the state, paid for by taxes, then blacks and whites had to go to separate schools. If it was public transportation that was either owned by the state or subsidized by the state, that was racially segregated. In addition to just, you had private institutions that were segregationist as well. Although a lot of that was class segregation as much as race segregation. But the way I look at that is, when the civil rights paradigm was created, what happened was they did an inversion where they said, okay, we're no longer going to have compulsory segregation. Now we're going to have compulsory integration. Right? And then the idea is that, well, okay, that's good, because we're going to get everybody going to, we're going to intermix the schools, racially and culturally, and we're not going to have discrimination in employment. Now, obviously, a libertarian problem with that would be, well, isn't that a law? Isn't that a government regulation? Isn't that an impingement on freedom of association? The problem I see there is, it's really the one that Lysander Spooner raised when it came to slavery. Like, if you go back and you look at what Lysander Spooner, because he lived in the antebellum period, so if you look at what his views on slavery were, Lysander Spooner said that slavery was unconstitutional from the point of view of the political theory of the U.S. Constitution, irrespective if it was upheld formally by law. And what he believed was that if the southern states wanted to remain in the Union, then they had to give up their slaves. Now, he supported their right to leave the Union, but he also supported slave insurrections and slave revolts, and even advocated armed struggle for the purpose of advancing this. Now, as far as how that would apply to segregation 100 years later, probably the most libertarian point of view would have been to say that if the states where segregation was the custom wanted to remain in the United States, they had to give up segregation. If they wanted, or they could also leave if they wanted to do that as well, but then they would be renouncing any benefits of living in the United States. I mean, meaning that Southern businesses would no longer get any government contracts. People living in the South would no longer be eligible for social programs and stuff like that. So if you want to, you've either can keep your segregation or you can keep your benefits of citizenship in the United States. Now, if let's say the South had said, well, we'll take the latter. We'll just leave the United States. Okay, I would have supported their right to do that. But it doesn't stop there, because just because a governmental system is decentralized does not mean that you have to accept everything that it does. Like for example, I'm big on local sovereignty, what in our system is called states' rights and stuff like that. But that doesn't mean everything a local government does is something you ought to just accept. For instance, let's say that your local government enacts zoning laws that have the effect of greatly inflating the cost of housing. Well, that doesn't mean you just say, well, hey, it's just a local government, it's just what they want to do. So no, you can always oppose that. You can work to oppose that and say, no, we want to do away with, I would say do away with zoning laws altogether. Some people might want to roll back zoning laws, but the same would be true of racist laws as well. Meaning that in that time period, if the South wanted to keep their segregation and leave the United States, they could, but then there would still needed to be a militant anti-segregationist movement in the South and among supporters from elsewhere. And I would say that about other things that are comparable, like when you one of you, I think it was Roosevelt, talked about the way in which racial stratification is rooted in some of these economic practices, like housing policy is a big part of that. Right? Like Walter Williams, he was a black libertarian economist. He wrote a book about 40 or 50 years ago called The State Against Blacks that really gets into this. But a lot of people don't realize that a lot of the problems that they object to when it comes to race are really socioeconomic problems. And a lot of those a lot of the Marxists will admit that. Like someone like Adolf Reed Jr. is like a Marxist theoretician. They'll admit this. But then where the Marxists go wrong is they don't understand the degree to which all of that is dependent on the state. Like they'll say, well, okay, a lot of the racial oppression is actually class oppression, but then the class oppression is made possible by the state. So that's really what you've got to target. You've got to target the ways in which racial disparities or racial oppression are contributed to and caused by state institutions and the collusion between state and capital.
Right.
And none of the political factions really get this. It's like the progressive, or liberal or left-wing anti-racist, or the Marxists, or you have people on the right who say, well, no, racism is actually a good thing, so we were in favor of it. That's not consistent on any level with any kind of serious application of anti-state principles. Now, what Rothbard and Rockwell were trying to do with this part of their plank is that they were basically trying to appeal to George Wallace voters. They were trying to appeal to old school, working class, Southern, Midwestern segregationists.
The new Southern strategy.
Right. It's sort of a watered down version of George Wallaceism. All right. But that was extremely short sighted, because it's not based on any serious class analysis of how the relationship between state and capital actually works and how that impacts race relations. It's just a very one-dimensional outlook that's created for short-term expediency in a way that's misguided. Now, it is true that without the state, you could still have your white nationalist anarchist commune or something like that. I know different types of anarchists who believe in that, but the old school American style racial segregation is not compatible with libertarianism of any kind. I mean, not only in the sense of theoretically and philosophically, but just institutionally. What made that what it was the relationship between state and capital.
So, two responses though. One to the most recent thing you said. I don't actually think it's possible to have white nationalist anarchists or racist, like anarchists or libertarians in general, because like I think racism and other forms of bigotry of innate characteristics are rooted in the principle that you don't have free will and therefore are relegated to being a subclass as subhumans. Like that's the reason these racists aren't like respectful of other races. That's the reason that these like heteronormative like anti-trans fucks aren't respectful of LGBT people. That's the reason that these misogynists aren't respectful of women. You know, when you start getting like into the like roots of their methodology, they're saying that somebody is this way and therefore inferior, and that's why we should be able to do X, Y, and Z to or relating to them, and that denies them their free will. And if you don't have free will, libertarianism is useless. The idea that, you know, we have all these choices, but we can't make any of them for ourselves because of the way we were born, is like, to me, absolutely absurd. Unless somebody, and like the original libertarian word before it became a politicized word was about free will. To be a libertarian was to be somebody who did not believe in determinism. And to me, the same applies in a political context where if you don't believe that somebody has the free will to be just as good as you because they're black, you're not a libertarian. You're just a statist who believes that they should be free to do what they want to do while also controlling other people based on innate characteristics and trying to prevent them from access to the same resources you have. That's just, you know, the same sort of statist caste system that, you know, has always existed in racist statist societies, and I don't think it's compatible with either anarchy nor libertarianism. Similarly, you know, LGBT hate, all this stuff, like, you know, people are born trans. If you don't like somebody because they're trans and you say that that like means that they're an inferior person who you should be able to squeeze out of your society, or in the words of Michael Knowles, eradicate them from public existence, that's statism. There is no way around that. I don't see any form of anarchist society being able to bar people based on their inherent characteristics. And the other half of that is that you look in people's ancestry DNA shit, you'll find that there's a shit ton of people who like claim that they're, you know, just white, and then you look in their fucking blood and nope, you aren't. You've got like Hitler even had Jewish and African blood. So it's like when you end up like with these purity testing things based on genetics, it's only ever going to result in statism, and it also has to reject some core premises of libertarianism in order to work. So that's my piece. I've made the case many times that bigotry is incompatible with libertarianism as a whole.
Well, I think you could make an argument, certainly along the lines of what you're saying, that it's not really something like that, like what you're criticizing. It's not really libertarian. You could say it's still a form of, you know, free association or whatever. Well, take the race component out of it. Let's apply it to something else. Like, let's say you have a Mormon commune or a Mormon community village or something, and
Sure.
they say, well, we're fine with, say, black people being here, although I don't know that all of them would be, but
Because they're Mormons.
Yeah, but we're gonna exclude people who drink caffeinated beverages, who drink alcohol, or consume tobacco.
Right, but those are choices. If you're going to exclude somebody based on a choice, that makes to me a whole lot more sense. Like if you have a sober living facility and you say, get the fuck out of here drunk, that makes sense to me. But that's based
a
sober living facility.
Yeah.
Like, and you say,
so for you, the distinction is between behavioral characteristics and immutable conditions.
right. Yeah. Like, because immutable conditions, if you start like having policy based on that shit, you're going to end up controlling people for things that you say that they can't control and can't be as good as you, like, based on. And in doing so, you're creating inherent casting class systems, honestly, both. And those things will always rely on the domination of resources and regions in order to exclude people based on the circumstances of their birth. Like if you, for instance, have, your anti-LGBT community, like people are born that way, and it's a genetic variant that's baked into human code. So you are going to have to like exclude a whole lot of their offspring in order to maintain that, and you're going to have to do that, everywhere you want these societies to be. And so that basically means that these kids are going to be shipped off to no parents, or they're going to be converted in-house so that their parents don't have to uproot. It's a messy process that means that it's not libertarian. It's anti-human, anti-freedom, anti-liberty. And to me, like, if you're not a libertarian, you can't be an anarchist, because you're trying to rule over other people. You're trying to say that you can't be black, you can't be gay, you can't be trans, or something like that. Those are things that they can't control. And if you're saying that they can't, like, if you're saying that they, should be controlled based on things that they can't control, that's archonic. There's no way it's not.
Well, let me raise this question. This is something I found on a libertarian anarchist forum, probably about 15 years ago. So this goes back a while. But I'm quoting another person here. But this person who wrote this was saying that after about a year of hanging around Libcom, if you're familiar with them, libcom.org, that's like a libertarian communist site. And something else called the Live Journal Anarchist Community. I don't know if that's still around or not. He says, I encountered people who, under the aegis of anarchist community self-management, supported, and then he lists off a number of things that he found anarchists, self-identified anarchists, in favor of: smoking and alcohol bans, bans on currently illicit drugs, bans on caffeinated substances, censorship of pornography on feminist grounds, bans on sexual practices like BDSM, no matter the gender of the participants or who is in the role, bans on prostitution, bans on religious or public religious expression, including atheist religions like Buddhism, on the grounds they're irrational, bans on advertising, which meant for any free speech with a commercial twist, bans on eating meat, gun control, except for members of the official community-approved militia, which is supposedly in no way the same thing as a police department. Mandatory work assignments, i.e. slavery, that's this person's words. Let's see, the blatant statement that anarchism is not individualist. This is a long list of things here that this particular person said that they found anarchists being in favor of. Now you could argue, well, these anarchists are not true anarchists. They're not, they don't really have libertarian values. But on the other hand, how's anybody going to prevent these people from doing things they want to do? Like, let's say that we have an anarchist revolution. Most people come to us, self-identify as anarchists, and most people say, well, okay, we're just going to have no government. We're just going to have eco villages, or whatever your preferred model of anarchy is. But then some people say, well, in our eco village, we're not going to allow anybody to read pornography. We're not going to allow anyone to practice BDSM. Or we're going to kick out all the meat eaters. Now, are they practicing free association, or are they practicing some kind of statism or some kind of authoritarianism? Maybe it's not statism. Maybe it's just authoritarianism. Because it's always seemed to me some of these ideas involve a lot of paradoxical aspects of anarchist theory that I think are interesting.
My rebuttal to that is that anarchy is not without order. There's still organization within anarchy, and within decentralization, which is congruent to anarchy, there are very many different ways of organizing, and it can manifest in very subjective ways unique to every community. However, just because it's stateless and dislikes the government does not make it anarchist, in my opinion. And, a white supremacist commune would be a great example of that, because it's baked into their philosophy that they see other people as lesser and degenerate and want to exterminate them. That's a pretty baseline fucking thing for a supremacist philosophy. And honestly, as an anarchist, you can't actually really stop a lot of these things from forming. But what you can do is you can defend yourself from them if they ever decide to like tread on you or like, you know, people that you care about. So that's my rebuttal to that.
Yeah, I've actually had this argument quite a few times with people who are like, well, your philosophy leaves room for there to be racism. I'm like, okay. So basically, your biggest concern is that a bunch of, say, ethno-nationalists might get together, form a community, move far away from the rest of us, and just live cut off from the rest of everyone else with, you know, their little racial supremacist community where none of us have to deal with them again? That's your biggest concern? Wow, what a nightmare that sounds like.
That implies, though,
Well, I
that their
think
ideas
kind
wouldn't
of-
spread. I think that's
And
probably...
yeah, and that they'd actually stay isolated.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I understand
I
that
think
argument.
kind of undermining it a little bit though, because like they wouldn't just do that because of their brain worms and how they think. Like they need to oppress people, and they will find people to oppress. So,
Well, it really stems, or much of it, I think, stems from, at the risk of playing armchair psychologist, stems from the need to feel like they're at least above somebody. Most of these people, at the end of the day, are losers who don't really have many accomplishments of their own and just need to feel like they're at least superior to someone. So if they don't have anything that they've actually accomplished on their own to feel proud of, they can at least feel proud of, say, their race or their sex or whatever.
Well, let's
there's
raise
one
the same question. Let's take a look at the same question, but take the race aspect out of it, because in an American cultural context, that's such a politically and emotionally charged issue for a lot of people. But let's say you have some other kind of authoritarian philosophy. Like, let's say that you have anarcho-Bolsheviks, you know, like you have, well, some people say, yeah, we're anarchists. We want to have our, you know, eco-village or, you know, cooperative commune or whatever. But ours is going to be organized according to Trotskyite principles. Ours is going to be organized according to Khmer's Rouge principles, you know, or ours are going to be based on the teachings of the Ba'athist movement. Again, it's the same issue. You know, none of those may theoretically be ethno-nationalist or make racial systems of differentiation, but they still have an authoritarian ideology. So can you be an authoritarian anarchist? And if so, what are the limits on that? You know, is it a matter of scale? Is it a matter of freedom of association? Is it a matter of adhering to the non-aggression principle? And then there's also the question of, like, one of you raised, like, well, what about expansionism? Like, you know, could you theoretically, for example, have something, you know, the size of, you know, the state of New York or Texas that was, you know, anarcho-Maoism, where, you know, like Maoism is the largest philosophy, say, but then all the institutions are these kind of egalitarian, you know, ecological communes or whatever. And then people who don't like Maoism, well, they're just free to leave the region.
So I have a few
it's
things
kind of
to say on that.
saying like a Maoist culture wouldn't become tyrannical and try to centralize and dominate over others. Like I truly don't think these people that you're talking about would just stop at going and forming their own little like local area of belief, because that's not their belief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
and
I have something.
in order to like pick this apart, we have to observe like the fundamental foundational principles of like anarchy and libertarianism: consent, freedom of association, and voluntary interaction. And like a lot of these systems, like a Maoist system, fucking completely disregards the consent of the individual. Like if somebody was born into a culture like that and decided that they wanted to disagree with a Maoist system, whoever's at the head of the Maoist system is going to fucking kill that person, because they're a dissent or they're a revisionary, they're an undesirable.
Yep.
You know, like, and that's just a part of their philosophy. You know, there's no getting around that.
Okay, so here's my thoughts, because I actually looked into some of these people, some of these tankies a little bit more closely, while formulating arguments, new information becomes available. I would define anarchy as a decentralized system that maintains, creates, and establishes rules of order that is completely voluntary on the right side and does not create unnecessary hierarchical domination. I actually listen to Anarch a lot, and what he doesn't say abolish all hierarchy, he says all unnecessary hierarchy. Well, if you create a racial, a ethnic, I guess, hierarchy based on someone, what they prefer to do in a bedroom, that's an unnecessary hierarchy because it doesn't need to exist. Even like Bakunin said hierarchies will exist. Like if I put more time into making videos, maybe I'll be better, or being a spokesperson or being a salesperson, I'll be better at it. That hierarchy is not unnatural because I put more time into something, so it'll exist. If I put more time into working out and eating right, then, so unnecessary hierarchy shouldn't exist. It should be voluntary. It should be decentralized. The issue I have is with Maoists, that doesn't actually make sense anymore, because I actually think Stalin was way, way worse now, because I studied the Great Leap Forward. I was looking into it more. And the reason that so many people died is because that was not evil, but central planning to say, hey, I'm going to go from an agrarian society to a technological society. And a lot of people starved to death because the Mao was just bad at it. So Mao was trying to get people up to speed with tech. Well, I think China's there. I think we're there. I think we have a lot of, tech that something like the Great Leap Forward wouldn't even make sense. So that's ridiculous at this point. There's also, I've read that Pol Pot himself read Kropotkin, but he got it extremely wrong. So you can read some of these thinkers, just like Milton Friedman was an okay Chicago economist, but then advocated for Pinochet. So I'd have to say you're not an anarchist if you, A, don't believe in voluntary interactions, don't believe in decentralized rules, and don't believe in unnecessary hierarchies. And I keep the yin and yang from your article, Keith, to kind of, bring those two together. We want those two together, even though it might seem inherently contradictory, but I don't think it is. It's basically saying I'm going to allow people to exist, and I'm not going to impose anything that makes me better than them unless it's actually something skill-based. So that's how I rationalize those three.
I will say that there is a middle ground between anarchism and voluntary libertarianism, specifically as far as a national scale goes. Like a libertarian society could absolutely exist if they gave anarchists and the people that didn't want to operate by it the opportunity to opt out.
To a certain extent.
If that was the option, libertarians could have their thing and anarchists could have their thing, and there wouldn't be much of an issue because it's all voluntarily based.
Oh, so you mean minarchism? Like libertarians could have a minarchist society, is what you're saying?
Yeah, but it's voluntary and it's opt-in. And you can
Right.
leave if you want to, and their state representatives constantly asking you if you consent and shit.
Yeah.
So basically, yeah. So Hoppian style covenant communities, for example, where you basically subscribe to government services, or
Depends on the kind of Hoppian covenant community alike.
Central libertarian system.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's just
So-
my thoughts.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think that's how a stateless society would be organized. You'd have different communities with different property norms and different customs and traditions and
Well, the main
values.
issue is that there's a dominating system that won't let other fucking cultures or systems thrive alongside it because
Right.
it's authoritarian. And if we have a culture that allows other cultures and systems to thrive alongside it, then all of our issues are solved. Really, the issue is the fucking state limiting, our ability to establish our own communities and cultures and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Me and Corey Johnston will be discussing this tomorrow. I think a good way to do that is communalism and social ecology at the bottom, because you build a bottom-up movement, and then you have what I would say people who are not so much your representatives, but like you're the people in your city as council people, and you also have voluntary interactions, which to me leads to a free market. That's probably going to be the best, thing of the two, and because here's the thing to say, can you have anarchism and also like some state thing? I don't think that works well, because you get something like Pol Pot, who Pol Pot probably did read Kropotkin, but then he messed it up really, really. Is that even true? Am I wrong?
Well, I mean, as soon as the voluntary system becomes involuntary, it's no longer congruent to like libertarian or anarchist principles and should be torn down by us.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So,
There was an essay.
real
that was
quick,
writ-
just not to cut you off, because I do want you to finish what you're saying. I want this particular episode to be like 2 hours. We're bumping up on 10 minutes before that 2 hours. So I guess we'll just do like a few minutes of closing statements from everyone, and you can say what you were going to say in yours. Keith, like I'll shut the fuck up for a bit, and you can do, and then we can do the rest of the points on another stream, because this one kind of got off the rails in the beginning, but I do want to cover the rest of the things, especially since it's about to get into the stuff that people really know Paleo from, and I think we could really nail down some of this stuff. So my thought is we'll do another stream about the next points at some point after next Sunday, when we can get the other guests on who couldn't make it today. And we'll try to get as many of those people on as possible alongside y'all, and we'll try to nail down like the next 2 points and the next 2 points, and we'll go along the series as long as it takes to really hammer out the paleo problems, and get to better solutions. If that sounds good to y'all, then I'd be like really glad to continue this at some other point. I just, I've got stuff that I need to take care of after 8. So, the general closing statements. You were going to say words, Keith. I did not want to cut you off.
Yeah, no problem. There was a really interesting short essay written a few years ago by an anarchist named Bellamy Fitzpatrick, who used to be on the Brilliant podcast. That was what it was called. But he was talking about how an anarchist thought there's something of a three-way paradoxical conflict between decentralist anarchy with a small a, and then ideological anarchism with a capital A, and then the wider kind of, compulsory, or not a compulsory, but the wider progressive, cultural paradigm that most anarchists subscribe to, meaning that theoretically you could have a world that was decentralist anarchy in the small a sense. Like Anthony Sutton once said, his ideal world would be of local self-rule, decentralized society, voluntary communities, things like that. You could have that, but then where ideological anarchism is actually very rare, but then you could also have a world where ideological anarchism was actually very commonplace within the framework of decentralized anarchy in the small a sense. But then would everyone necessarily be culturally progressive, as that may be defined at any one time? For instance, I've noticed among a lot of anarchists nowadays, veganism or vegetarianism are very popular. But would that necessarily be commonplace? Or majority of people who self-identify as anarchists tend to be in favor of abortion rights, but would that be universal? Would there not be some communities, localities, cultures, institutions where they said, no, we don't believe in that here? Yeah. And then if that happened, would that not be non-anarchist? And to what degree are anarchists obligated to tolerate the existence of non-anarchists? And then how do you rank your priorities? Well, okay, like I would agree with Green, for example, that to be a consistent anarchist, you have to be sort of a decentralist, voluntarist, non-hierarchicalist. That's a pretty good way to look at it. Right. But then within that, there's a system of ranking. Okay, well, what is, obviously that's incompatible with a fascist state. It's incompatible with a Stalinist, Maoist regime. Is it compatible? Maybe more tolerable would be, local zoning ordinances or something like that. But but if you have an anarchist, locality, are you going to go to war with another locality that has zoning laws because we don't believe in zoning laws and they're sponsoring oppression? So it's like we're going to let's go fight them, and so you got to do away with those zoning laws. So these are all paradoxical aspects of the theoretical framework we're talking about, which I think are interesting. I don't think there's any one right or wrong answer to a lot of the stuff.
Yeah. Well, we will certainly have more to discuss on that next. So was that basically your closing statement?
Yeah.
Do you want to plug anything in specific? Anything I should include in the bio?
If people want to know more about me, they can just go to the website, attackthesystem.com.
Cool. Yeah, I want to start doing that. I want to start getting actually professional-ish, getting to the point where I'm like actively promoting and encouraging people to check out other people's shit, because like y'all are the backbone behind these streams. Like the reason I have these streams with many people so that I can have people go to your sites and help you get shit done. So I'll be starting to do that. And is there you can send me any relevant essays that you would think would be like something that people should read from Attack the System, and I'll put those in the bio. So you can do that the chat we're in. Hody.
Yeah, my basic thing is we're discussing a lot of technicalities, but I think probably is it technically anarchy? Is it not? But really, if there's a million dead bodies, I don't care who to blame so much as that sucks, and that's something to be avoided. The issue that I have, and I guess I'll tie this into my plug, is that if it's not based in love, it's just not going to work. What's funny is even Dave Smith has said that before, and he and I clash a lot, but this is something that I agree with him on, is that if it's not based on love, then your movement's not going to work. Because frankly, if you don't care about your neighbors, well then when statism transgresses against your neighbors, what are you going to do? You're not going to risk your own life. You're not going to risk your own limb. You love yourself more than them. You don't love your neighbor as yourself. You dislike your neighbor, or you're indifferent to their suffering.
And they probably know that and won't give a shit when something happens to you. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, exactly. I mean, and this is our safety as anarchists needs to be tied to each other, or as libertarians even needs to be tied to each other and tied to people who aren't anarchists and who aren't libertarians. If you want people to stop relying on the state, then they need to rely on something. Mankind's not meant to be alone. That's another thing in the Bible there. Mankind's not good alone. We're not all islands. We're not all good at everything. We're not all gifted. I mean, this division of labor 101 Adam Smith style. Do one specific thing, be really good at it, lend it to society, and borrow from society a billion other people who are also specializing at what makes them unique. And the thing is we should be doing that and saying, I love what everybody adds to society. The paleo libertarian or the paleo conservative, paleo libertarian strategy was to say, I mean, this is how they marketed it, was we're going to get rid of that rap music and this certain kind of architecture and painting that isn't very accurate. This is legit, this is what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And what's funny is not only was it kind of not effective, but that ended up creating a bunch of regulatory agencies that, surprise, surprise, work against censoring libertarian culture and music and artwork. And we go, oh, how could we have seen that coming? We sold out to these guys so that they would protect us. We were only trying to sell out our immigrant neighbors. We were only trying to sell out the black ones that did the rap music. Who would have known that would have come around for our podcast and our music and our lifestyle? We only wanted to sell out those guys, and we ended up selling out ourselves as well.
Oh, shucks.
It's right. Aw, shucks. It's tied in. Lew Rockwell himself pronounced paleo-libertarianism dead after Rothbard died. And that should have been the end of it. The idea that we tried to, once again, sacrifice cultural and social libertarianism in order to achieve some modicum of freedom, like ending the Fed or something, is absurd. It hasn't happened. It won't happen. Rockwell in his breakdown even noted that the libertarians kind of didn't care about central economy. like at the end of it, like at the end of the paleo movement, the libertarians were just kind of more interested in the racism and the hostility with one another. They had no funding. They had a bunch of infighting. It was such a mess. And when
if you can
Rockwell
find a
just
link
goes,
to that, by the way, that'd be great. I'll put that in the bio.
I actually have his essay. Hang on.
But yeah, we'll get to that after that. You finish your.
Sure. Yeah, I'll finish my thing. Now you got me interested in that. Yeah, so like the thing is that like if Rockwell acknowledged that it was a failure the first time, of course Rockwell's down for it the second time. Because it's post-Liberty Rockwell. It's post-Liberty Rothbard that we're talking about here. And surprise, surprise, post-Liberty anybody kind of sucks, right? Like when people go down now I won't say that Rothbard went down like the alt-right pipeline, but he went down the right-wing pipeline. And that just sucks. Like he just wasn't as good. His works weren't as impressive. His thinking wasn't as good. And it's really a shame. And so the thing is, do we want to follow them there? Or do we want to stand firm on our principles? Now, even if we don't get everything that we want, this is what democracy and the lure of government always promises. You'll get a little bit of what you want if you compromise with us. That's never happened yet. So you might as well stand firm in your principles. The Libertarian Party of New Hampshire is always like, oh, if all the trans people got killed, but we could get rid of taxation, it was worth it. First of all, terrible, awful, evil, unethical thing to suggest. Secondly, nobody's making you that offer. This offer only exists in your heads, that the conservatives will somehow go, all right, yeah, we'll do small government economy so long as you give way and let us murder all of your trans friends. No one's suggesting it. So don't offer it because they're not offering anything in return.
It's just like the dumb fuck bear thing.
Right. Stand by your trans friends, stand by your gay friends, stand by your anarcho-capitalist friends, stand by your anarcho-communist friends, stand by them and fight for their rights. And you know what? Stand by your Republican friends and Democrat friends to say, hey, I don't want anything bad to happen to you. Let's help each other out. And if they can depend on you enough and they don't need to depend on a government, surprise, surprise, nobody wants to depend on a government. I mean, we talked about people on welfare. They do a bad job when you depend on them. Look at the VA. Look at anything. Look at the driver's license bureau. Look at anything that you have to rely on them for and say, oh boy, I'm really excited to do this again. You're a good person. If you are hearing this and you've managed to get this far in the conversation, you are probably a good person because you're willing to hear people out. You're willing to hear long form answers. And that means that you are probably you can provide somebody a sense of security. Maybe not in every way, but at least in some ways. Be a good friend to people, fill them with love. If you're interested in joining the Love First Christians, don't have to be a Christian to join. We love to have discussions. We're discussing the book of Daniel this upcoming week. We'd love to have you join us. Just ask me for a Discord link. You find it on my pages, but my name is Hody Johns, Hodey, space Johns, and I would love to have you.
Kareem.
All right. So you can find me at Kareem6633 on X. I'm going to be a delegate for PA, so you can come and say hi at the Libertarian National Convention, where I said who I'm supporting, Michael Rechtenwald, and also Clint for VP, but still a big fan of everything Joshua Smith says. Also going to be trying to do a stream with Jeremiah and a few people on democratic confederalism and how that ties into Austrian economics tomorrow. Keith, you're welcome if possible. And I'll be on the Skeptical Leftist Corey Johnston show tomorrow to talk about cooperation, Tulsa in Oklahoma, and how to build a communalist social ecology society. My strategy simply is just keep getting the word out there, keep doing everything you can to advance liberty. And I think that's slowly happening in our lifetime. I also do support the ICC. I'm going to say that fully. All these Republicans are mad. Good. Screw them. Bibi should go to jail. Because as libertarians, if we can't stop something from that like happening, then what is really the point of all of this?
Jacking off.
Yeah. I mean, there's a hot chick around. But Also, check out Keith at Attack the System. Check us out at Anarch Unity. You can check out my show, The Essential Libertarians. Going to try and amp those all up after convention. And also, if you're interested in actual anarchist unity, getting to know other anarchists, all different types, I recommend, if you have Discord or use Discord, going to Mad Liberty, meaning Liz, meaning my Bobby, and also going on EXE, which is E and all those people. And you can also catch me on the show Jeremiah Talks and Outlaw Thoughts with Layton.
Lizard.
Well, I guess my closing statement would be that if it's not voluntary or respects individual agency and consent, it's not anarchy. And also, if you're going after somebody for their beliefs or their organizational structure without them or that structure hurting you first, you're probably a piece of shit and shouldn't do that. So that's my closing statement.
Okay.
Rose.
Well, there's a lot more to discuss on this topic.
Absolutely.
As Jeremy already said there, yeah, just have to keep hammering on this later on. But I will say this. I've been in these circles long enough to have seen this scenario play out enough times where baby libertarians or otherwise naive libertarians will think that they can ally with the statist right because right-wing statists like to play lip service to individual liberty. They like to say liberty. They have this vaguely defined idea of liberty that they will go on about. They like to pay lip service to free markets, and they like to pay lip service to freedom of speech when they're not currently in control of the state or its various institutions. These things, though, do not last once they have power. As soon as they come into contact with something they don't like and they have the power to make it go away, they stop being all about liberty. I've seen this play out so many times. Like like libertarian friends allying with groups who were they to still have institutional power would be the people who were trying to ban heavy metal music or Dungeons and Dragons or comic books or video games they don't like, you name it. So yeah, and to conclude here, I will say that allying ourselves with the right wing is not a good idea, even if they claim to share some of our values. Yeah. I've just seen this play out too many times. Anyway, if you like what I'm saying, you can donate to my convention fund. All donations are greatly appreciated. If you don't like what I'm saying, I would also like to encourage you to donate to my convention fund, because then you can tell me to my face how much you hate me.
Mm-hmm.
With that, have a good night, everybody. And
what I'll say is this is going to be a good conversation to continue, and good conversation to get the other folks in on next Sunday. While other people are having a convention, we'll sort of have our counter convention. We'll bring up the problems that were discussed this week, the plank and shit, and we'll also bring up a lot of the chat comments that I didn't address this week, because there's a shit ton of those as well. But I figure those people will be on next week, so we can get some elaborations, and I'll just use these as like notes and shit to like hammer some issues. Then we'll get all the full gaggle together to piss off all the people who don't like the fact that my show has people on it who challenge each other. They can go fuck themselves. And the general mindset that I want to go forward with is seek to neither rule nor be ruled. That's it. Anyway, smash the fucking state.
And a like button.
And subscribe.
Yeah. I call yourself a deep ecologist.
We off the air yet?